Hey everyone, what's going on? Today we're diving into the life and legacy of a super complex dude, Joseph Stalin. This Soviet leader ruled with an iron fist for decades, and his time in power was full of both incredible achievements and horrifying atrocities. We'll be throwing up some pictures and videos along the way to bring this story to life. But first, let's answer the question, how does a young seminarian dropout become one of the most powerful dictators in history? That's the story of Joseph Stalin. Let's rewind all the way back to 1878. Joseph Stalin wasn't born Stalin. That was a later nickname meaning man of steel he adopted in his revolutionary years. His real name, Iosif Vissarionis Dze Jogaishvili, was a real tongue twister. Born in the Georgian city of Gori, Stalin's life wasn't easy. His father was a shoemaker who struggled to make ends meet, and young Joseph battled smallpox as a child. This illness left him with facial scars that would stay with him for life. School offered some solace. Stalin was a bright student, excelling in languages and religious studies. He even earned a scholarship to attend the Tiflis Theological Seminary, a prestigious religious school. This might seem surprising for the future communist leader, but religious education was one of the few paths to social mobility at the time. However, the strict seminary life didn't quite suit Stalin. He became increasingly drawn to radical ideas, particularly Marxism, which called for overthrowing the existing social order. He participated in protests and even got expelled for revolutionary activities. This is where his life took a sharp turn, leading him away from the priesthood and towards a path of revolution. Stalin's expulsion from the Tiflis Theological Seminary wasn't just a bump in the road. It was a pivotal moment that sent him hurtling towards a revolutionary path. While the strict religious environment might not have suited him, his time there exposed him to ideas beyond the narrow confines of the Georgian town of Gori. He devoured books and engaged in heated debates, particularly drawn to the writings of philosophers and thinkers who challenged the existing social order. One name stands out most prominently, Karl Marx. Marx's theories about class struggle, where the wealthy elite oppressed the working class, resonated deeply with Stalin. Here, in these radical ideas, Stalin found a way to understand his own experiences. His impoverished childhood, his father's drunken rages, the vast inequality he witnessed growing up, all of it fit neatly into Marx's framework. The idea that the existing system was inherently flawed and needed a complete overhaul became a burning conviction for Stalin. Stalin didn't simply embrace these ideas intellectually, he felt them viscerally. He started participating in underground study groups, discussing and dissecting revolutionary texts. He joined protests alongside workers, his fiery speeches and sharp intellect making him a rising star among revolutionaries. The once pious seminary student was now a dedicated communist agitator, determined to dismantle the Tsarist regime and create a new order based on equality. It's important to note that while Marx's ideas inspired Stalin, they didn't define him completely. Even at this early stage, Stalin displayed a ruthlessness that would become a hallmark of his leadership. He wasn't afraid to use violence or intimidation to achieve his goals, a side that would become terrifyingly evident in the years to come. This extended version delves deeper into the intellectual and emotional forces that shaped Stalin's revolutionary zeal. It also introduces a hint of the darker aspects of his personality that would later manifest in his leadership style. While other revolutionaries like Leon Trotsky captivated crowds with fiery speeches, Stalin thrived in the shadows. He understood that real power resided in organization and control. Here's how he became a master climber within the Communist Party. The Gray Man, Stalin wasn't blessed with charisma, but he possessed an impressive work ethic. He meticulously studied Marxist theory, devouring everything from Marx and Engels to the works of leading Bolshevik thinkers. This intellectual foundation gave him credibility within the party. The network weaver, Stalin excelled at building relationships. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, taking on seemingly mundane tasks like fundraising and organizing local party cells. This allowed him to build a network of loyal followers who owed him favors and were beholden to his leadership. The strategist, Stalin was a master of political maneuvering. He carefully observed his rivals, identifying their strengths and weaknesses. He strategically formed alliances, exploiting their ambitions and pitting them against each other. This divide and conquer tactic allowed him to consolidate power without directly confronting his opponents. Don't underestimate the importance of paperwork. Stalin understood the power of the party apparatus. He strategically positioned himself within the party bureaucracy, gaining control over key positions and influencing the flow of information and resources. This bureaucratic power base became a crucial tool in his rise to the top. Even in his early days within the party, Stalin wasn't afraid to use violence to achieve his goals. He participated in bank robberies to fund the Bolshevik cause and readily used intimidation tactics against rivals. While these acts weren't yet widespread, they hinted at the ruthlessness that would become a defining characteristic of his rule. By 1917, the seeds of revolution were deeply sown in Russia. Decades of poverty, corruption within the Tsarist regime, and the devastating losses of World War I had left the population disillusioned and desperate. This simmering discontent provided the perfect tinderbox for the Bolsheviks, led by the charismatic Vladimir Lenin. On November 7, 1917, October 25th, according to the Julian calendar still used in Russia at the time, the Bolsheviks launched their revolution. In a dramatic event known as the October Revolution, Bolshevik forces stormed the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, now called Petrograd, the seat of the Tsarist government. The poorly defended palace fell quickly, marking a turning point in Russian history. With the Tsar overthrown, the Bolsheviks established a provisional government with Lenin at the helm. They promised a radical transformation of Russia, including land redistribution, taking land from wealthy landowners and distributing it among peasants, a policy that would have a major impact on the rural population, worker control, empowering factory workers to have a say in how their workplaces were run, peace at any cost, ending Russia's involvement in World War I, a move that was wildly popular with war-weary citizens. The Bolsheviks faced fierce opposition from other socialist factions and pro-Tsarist forces. A brutal civil war erupted, lasting for several years. Ultimately, the Bolsheviks emerged victorious, solidifying their control over Russia. In 1922, the newly formed Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, was born. The world's first communist state had arrived. The birth of the Soviet Union was a bloody and chaotic affair. Millions perished in the Civil War, and the country lay in ruins. However, the Bolsheviks had succeeded in overthrowing the Tsarist order and establishing a new communist system. This event would have a profound impact on global politics for decades to come. Stalin, the puppet master behind the scenes. Here's a deeper dive into how Stalin, the ultimate political schemer, rose to power within the newly formed Soviet Union. While Lenin basked in the glory of leading the revolution, Stalin played the long game. He understood that true power resided in controlling the party machinery, not flashy speeches or public popularity. He diligently built a network of loyalists within the party ranks, particularly in the bureaucracy. Stalin was a master at identifying and exploiting weaknesses in his rivals. He strategically pitted them against each other, whispering doubts and fueling rivalries. This kept his opponents distracted and weakened their positions. Stalin wasn't afraid to form temporary alliances to achieve his goals. He would align himself with other party leaders, only to undermine them later when they became inconvenient. This ruthless pragmatism allowed him to eliminate threats one by one. As Lenin's health deteriorated in the mid-1920s, a power struggle erupted within the party. Stalin cleverly positioned himself as the caretaker, the loyal lieutenant who would uphold Lenin's legacy. However, behind the scenes, he was meticulously consolidating power and maneuvering against his rivals. Tiev's seemingly bureaucratic position of General Secretary of the Communist Party might have looked underwhelming to some. However, Stalin understood its true potential. As General Secretary, he controlled the flow of information within the party, essentially becoming the gatekeeper to power. He used this position to sideline his opponents and promote his own loyalists. Throughout his rise to power, Stalin maintained a facade of humility and loyalty. He rarely spoke out publicly, preferring to operate in the shadows. This unassuming demeanor allowed him to downplay his ambitions and lull his opponents into a false sense of security. By employing these tactics, Stalin emerged as the victor in the power struggle following Lenin's death. He had transformed the seemingly innocuous role of General Secretary into a position of absolute control. The stage was now set for his brutal reign as the leader of the Soviet Union. Collectivization, a recipe for disaster. Stalin envisioned the USSR as a mighty industrial powerhouse, and agriculture was the key to his plan. He believed forcing peasants into large, state-controlled farms kolkhozes would boost food production and free up labor for factories. However, this policy, known as collectivization, turned into a horrific disaster. Forced labor and resistance. Millions of peasants were brutally forced to give up their land and animals. Many resisted, leading to violent clashes and mass executions. Traditional farming practices were disrupted, leading to plummeting harvests. The Holodomor famine. The disastrous collectivization policies, coupled with harsh weather conditions, led to a devastating famine in Ukraine known as the Holodomor and other parts of the Soviet Union in the early 1930s. Millions perished from starvation and disease. While millions starved in the countryside, Stalin pushed for rapid industrialization. Steel mills, factories, and power plants sprouted across the USSR. However, this progress came at a terrible human cost. 5-year plans. Stalin implemented a series of ambitious 5-year plans with unrealistic production goals. Workers toiled long hours under harsh conditions, facing brutal punishment for not meeting quotas. Safety regulations were ignored, leading to widespread accidents and injuries. Stalin's paranoia about enemies, both real and imagined, reached a fever pitch during the Great Purge of the late 1930s. Here's a deeper look at this dark period. The Great Terror. Fueled by fear and suspicion, Stalin unleashed a wave of terror against anyone he perceived as a threat. Political rivals, former colleagues, intellectuals, artists, even ordinary citizens. Show trials became a horrifying spectacle, with people forced to confess to fabricated crimes. The Gulag system. Millions were arrested, imprisoned, or sent to forced labor camps in Siberia known as the Gulag. These camps were notorious for their brutality, harsh living conditions, and high death rates. Impact on the military. The Great Purge also targeted the military leadership. Experienced officers were arrested, executed, or sent to the Gulag. This purge would have devastating consequences for the Soviet Union during World War II. By the late 1930s, Stalin had transformed the Soviet Union into an industrial powerhouse, but at a horrifying cost. Millions had perished in famines, purges, and brutal labor camps. Fear and repression permeated every aspect of Soviet life. Stalin had achieved modernization through brutality, leaving a legacy that continues to be debated by historians. Hitler's betrayal and the Great Patriotic War. In 1941, Adolf Hitler shattered the peace by launching a surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. This betrayal, known as Operation Barbarossa, forced Stalin to confront a new and deadly enemy. Initially unprepared, the Soviets suffered staggering losses of territory and manpower. However, Stalin rallied the nation with a powerful message of patriotism, calling the war the Great Patriotic War. Despite Stalin's brutal purges that had weakened the military leadership, the Soviet people displayed immense bravery and resilience. The harsh winter of 1941-1942 took a heavy toll on the German army, ill-equipped for the brutal conditions. The tide began to turn with the epic Battle of Stalingrad, a brutal fight that became a symbol of Soviet resistance. The Soviets eventually pushed back the German invaders, inflicting heavy casualties on the Nazi war machine. The Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany came at a terrible cost. Millions of soldiers and civilians perished in the fighting. Entire cities lay in ruins. The scars of war ran deep across the entire Soviet landscape. The dawn of the Cold War. Following the war, tensions between the Soviet Union and the West, particularly the United States, escalated rapidly. Ideological differences, mistrust, and the race to develop atomic weapons fueled this new era of tension known as the Cold War. Stalin, suspicious of the West's intentions, sought to expand Soviet influence in Eastern Europe, creating a buffer zone against future invasions. The world entered a delicate and dangerous period of geopolitical rivalry. Stalin's role in World War II remains a topic of debate. He was a ruthless dictator responsible for unimaginable suffering within his own country. However, he cannot be denied credit for mobilizing the Soviet people in a desperate struggle against Nazi Germany. The Hussars' sacrifices played a vital role in defeating Hitler's war machine. End of an era. Stalin's death and a complex legacy. Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist for nearly 3 decades. His death in 1953 marked the end of an era and a turning point for the nation. Stalin's legacy is a complex and often contradictory one. Here's a closer look at the two sides of the coin. The architect of modernization, Stalin transformed the Soviet Union from a backward agrarian society into a major industrial power. He oversaw rapid industrialization and built a formidable military machine, the butcher of his own people. However, this progress came at a horrific human cost. Millions perished in famines caused by collectivization policies. The Great Purge unleashed a wave of terror, with millions more executed or sent to labor camps in the Gulag. Despite his brutality, Stalin's leadership during World War II is undeniable. The Soviet Union's fight against Nazi Germany was a major factor in defeating Hitler. However, this victory came at a devastating cost to the Soviet people. Stalin's legacy continues to cast a long shadow over Russia and the former Soviet republics. He is remembered as a ruthless dictator who crushed dissent and caused immense suffering. Yet, some see him as a strong leader who modernized the country and secured victory in war. The debate over Stalin's legacy is likely to continue for years to come. So, who was Joseph Stalin? A visionary leader who dragged his country into the modern world? A ruthless dictator who ruled through fear? The answer, like the man himself, is complex. He was both a great modernizer and a tyrant responsible for horrific crimes. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think about Stalin. And if you enjoyed the video, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about history's most fascinating and sometimes frightening figures.